Hello, everyone. First, let me thank you for being interested in the topic of my presentation. My name is Pelaya Rico, and I'm a recently graduated master student. And I'm going to talk about the study I did for my master thesis under the title of Defining a Protocol for Recreational Scuba Diving Carrying Capacity within a Marine Protected Area. But first, let me make a brief mention of some of the human-related impacts that coral reefs suffer. Some of these human-related impacts come from recreational activities that we have around and within coral reefs every day, such as, for example, scuba diving or snorkeling. Moreover, within these activities, the impacts listed here include divers' direct contact by stepping or kicking the coral reef, producing abrasion or breakage of the coral tissue, the anchor drifts, waste disposal from diving boats, and the increased stress of marine life, for example, with diver crowds around something special in the reef. For my study, I defined two main objectives. First, I wanted to obtain scientific information by calculating the tourism carrying capacity of 10 selected dive sites that will help local and international decision makers and conservation organizations in Roatan in the aim to protect Roatan's coral reefs and the communities that depend on it for their livelihoods. And second, to evaluate the role of two different factors that I consider that they put the coral reef at risk after some literature review. Those are diver level of certification and presence of lionfish spear. My project took place on Roatan, one of the islands of the Bay Island archipelago from Honduras. The three main islands of this archipelago are Utila, Roatan, and Manaja. Roatan is the major or biggest island of the archipelago, and this archipelago is located in the north coast of Honduras in the Mesoamerican region of the Caribbean. All around the island, moreover, you can find more than 100 dive sites offering different types of dive between from shallow seagrass sites to deeper sites following the river. For my project, I focused on the two areas of West End and West Bay on the west coast of Roatan. These two areas are consolidate most of the diving tourism of the island. As you can see, from the 10 selected dive sites, 5 were from West End and 5 were from West Bay, including Canyon Reef, Half Moon Bay, Moonlight, Lighthouse and Blue Channel in Western and Deep Sequest, Butchers Bank, Mandy Seal Garden, Western Wall, and Texas in West Bay. The 10 dive sites were selected based on popularity through the dive centers and with the consultation of the Roatan Marine Park, which is a community non-profit organization dedicated to the conservation of the island. For calculating the tourism carrying capacity, which is defined as the biophysical and social capacity of a tourist an environment can support, in this case, a marine protected area, can support without being degraded, I used the method defined by Cifuentes in 1992, but with the adaptations made by Gallo, Sousa, Agustowski, and Velasco that make this for marine protected areas and not terrestrial protected areas. There are three main steps in the calculation of this carrying capacity. That first is the physical carrying capacity, then the real carrying capacity, and then the effective carrying capacity. As you can see in the figure, each step is more specific than the one before, reducing the number of divers by adding some different factors that we'll explain next. The first step is the physical carrying capacity. This first approach expresses the number of divers allowed by the physical characteristics of each dive site by including the surface of the dive site. In this case was calculated with the cycle kit method for linear distances of the dive site, the standardized surface of a diver, the time in a day for diving, and the average dive time. The second step is the real carrying capacity. This second approach uses the estimated number of divers from the physical carrying capacity and adjusts this number by applying different correction factors. In the case of this study, the correction factors of these four correction factors were selected. First, the fragility correction factor based on the fragile coral cover species, a social correction factor based on the number of groups allowed at the same time in a dive site, The damage correction factor based on the frequency of contact from divers with the reef, and finally the correction factor for climatic conditions, based on the days where climatic conditions were favorable for diving. And the third and last step is the effective carrying capacity. This last approach of the method uses the number of the divers estimated by the real carrying capacity and applies the management capacities from the local and international organizations in charge of protecting the reef. In the case of this study, this management capacity was calculated or estimated by giving the Ratan Marine Park, as it is the main patrolling force for the reef conservation, questionnaires about three variables to evaluate its own management capacity. These three variables were infrastructure, equipment, and personnel. As a result, we obtained the number of divers that these dive sites can hold without being degraded for the current state of the coral each year. But how was possible to measure the impact on the reef by divers? Well, I used the method defined by Raphael and English in 1997. This method is based on an observer that followed each diver for 10 minutes from a safe distance, so the diver was not aware and the normal behavior was not influenced. During this time, the number of contacts with the reef, as well as the type of contact with three categories, no damage, abrasion contact, or breakage contact, was recorded, allowing to sample 3 divers per dive, obtaining after a total of 60 dives during 2 months, 180 divers at the sample size. As additional information, as I mentioned before, the certification level of each diver and the presence of lionfish spear was also recorded, obtaining 2 different variables. This was possible by first having some pre-dive briefing with the mentioning of each diver's certification level, and second, by casual conversation with the divers. The certification level variable had 3 groups, mainly open water divers, advanced open water divers, and dive master, based on the five to six main certifications from PADI and SSI diving agencies, as no divers with other certification were served, even though 180 different divers were recorded in a total through the 10 dive sites. In the case of the use of the lionfish spear, which for you need to take a course given by the Ratan Marine Park, 2 groups were defined, the presence of lionfish spear and the absence of lionfish spear. For the statistical analysis of the certification level, a one-way ANOVA was used, and for the lionfish spear, an independent t-test was done in order to compare groups within both variables. Moving on now to the results, I wanted to show first on the left how different was the distribution of contacts through the different dive sites. As you can see, Half Moon Bay is the site that presents more number of contacts compared to the deep sequence that is the dive site where less number of contacts were observed, with a difference between them of 36 contacts. So it is shown that there is quite a difference on the impact that each site suffers. Now, looking at the CC carrying capacity table on the right, we can find divers allowed per day as effective carrying capacity and the annual estimated number of divers that at the actual level won't degrade the reefs. Now, as mentioned before, there is a significant difference between sites. As you can see also in this annual number of divers, Half Moon Bay, which was the site with most incident contacts during the study, present the lowest number of divers, and Deep Sequence, the one with less contacts, present the higher number of divers. In addition, we should consider, when understanding these numbers of divers per year, that for the last 2 years, the diving industry in Latam has started to reactivate after a break in their activity due to COVID restrictions, but it is still at its full capacity, as Roatan is one of the most famous diving destinations over the Caribbean. As a conclusion, we can say that each dive site is impacted differently and should be protected in a specific way. Now, when looking at the certification level results, we observe first that the distribution of certification was not homogeneous, as mentioned before, and on the right graph, that with the extent in the certification level, the mean number of contacts, both total and per type of contact, decreases, allowing us to conclude that higher number of contacts were observed at lower certification level, where skills such, for example, as buoyancy control, are less important compared to divers' joys when learning how to dive a course. And to finish with the results, the lionfish spear also presented two groups of different sizes. However, with the statistical analysis was possible to test and obtain a significant difference between having or not having the lionfish spear, showing higher frequency of contact with the presence of lionfish spear, producing a significant impact on the reefs, which could be considered as a trade-off between both impacts, the contact with the reef and the lionfish invasion, although both impacts do not have the same effect in magnitude and intensity. To summarize the main points of my presentation and project, we can highlight three main conclusions. First, that lower certification levels had a bigger impact on coral reefs compared to higher and more skilled certification levels. Second, the presence of lionfish spear had a bigger impact on coral reefs and due to its incorrect use. And third and last, dive sites experience different magnitudes of impacts at different levels, showing different values of the carrying capacity. So each dive site have to be taken care in a specific way. And lastly, I wanted to make some kind of recommendations, like, for example, increase the diver environmental education and awareness, as well as significant skills such as buoyancy, in order to reduce these impacts by direct contact with the coral reef. Revise the curriculum of the lionfish spearfishing course, as some of the licensed divers were using it in a not in the correct way, and consider carrying capacity as a useful adaptive management tool to help control the evolution of these impacts by periodic reevaluation on the marine protected area. And that's all. Thanks for your attention. I hope you found my presentation interesting, and let's see you around.